Welcome to An Awful World, but not awful like you think.
This is the show where we discuss whether we would have discovered important advances in a world exclusively full of Haylies and Libbys. I'm Haylie.
And I'm Libby.
And today we're talking about timekeeping.
The keeping of time.
Yes.
Yes.
And today is actually super exciting. This is going to be a two-parter.
It is going to be a two-parter, part 2, featuring a very special guest.
Yes.
And I'm super excited.
Me too. We'll get to there in part 2.
Yeah, we're not going to tell you right away.
No.
No. You got to tune back in to find out who it's going to be.
That's right. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started.
Haylie is so excited about timekeeping. And I kind of am too. I just want to say, just from the get-go, that like, when we're like, okay, we're going to do timekeeping, I was kind of like, okay. And then I started reading about it and I was like, whoa.
Yeah, it becomes like very fascinating. I definitely wanted to talk about it though, because the keeping of time seems nonsensical the way that we do it.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
And I'm like, there's literally no way that this is how we would do it.
Right.
So I was like, I have to know the backstory. Why would we have 24 hours?
Yes.
Why would hours be 60 minutes?
Which is so interesting because this is something we've contemplated kind of in our calendar episode. Just briefly.
Mm-hmm.
But take us away, Haylie. I know you're so excited about this.
I'm so excited. Okay. So who do you think has to do with the 24-hour system?
Haylie, could it possibly be the Egyptians?
Absolutely. Of course it's the Egyptians.
Course.
And they're just our Roman Empire.
They so are.
Like the amount of times that we talk about the Egyptians, and so now everything I do, I'm like, thank you, Egyptians.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving us everything. Thank you for being the smartest people alive.
Like, not just walk like an Egyptian, it's like do everything like an Egyptian.
Exactly.
Because they were, like, I don't want to discredit the Romans, right?
No.
The Romans are very intelligent people. The Egyptians? The Egyptians are, I mean, like wildly, insanely intelligent people.
Yes.
Insanely.
Absolutely. But, and I will give you the backstory on why they have this system, but I still disagree with it. Unfortunately, I'm not so sorry, Egyptians.
I'm not surprised by that, but I have some ideas of some things that I can share with you that I think you'll enjoy.
Yeah. So starting strong is they had a 12-month calendar and they used a 10-day period, which you and I have discussed that we want a 10-day week.
Yeah. So are we as smart as the Egyptians? I think so.
Absolutely. But they used this 10-day period because you could see a constellation in the sky for 10 days.
And they had a weird name for that.
Deacons.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
So at the rise of the star named Sirius, you could see a span of 12 deacons. And so that's how you get 12 hours in a night, or 12 sections, because they didn't have, specific hours yet.
Right.
But then from there, they were like, well, we might as well just do 12 sections in the day.
Makes sense.
Yeah. But that's how we get the 24 hours, which I don't agree with. And, whatever. And then I know you also read about the Babylonians.
Yes. So this was all like 5,000 years ago.
Yes.
The Egyptians and the Babylonians started to develop this like 12 sections of the day and night. They call them temporal hours. And actually, this is something interesting that I always say that, and it drives me insane about myself.
But it is interesting.
Interesting. So for the most part, for the Egyptians and the Babylonians, them coming up with this timekeeping system and the constellations and all that was more for their harvesting, which makes sense. Like planting and harvesting, we need to know times of year and that sort of thing, which goes hand in hand with the calendars thing. But they also had this timekeeping system for social events.
Cute.
I know, which I love. And like, have you thought about a world where there's just like no, like, let's meet at 10:30?
That is immediately what I thought of when doing this, because they didn't have like actual time.
Right.
So what do you do besides be like meet you at sunrise or meet you at sunset? What do you do in the middle of the day?
When the sun is 3/4 of the way across the sky, let's meet up
right
at the McDonald's.
But then I would be like, well, if we live in different areas, won't it look different in the sky?
We got so much to say about that.
It's just stressful.
It is stressful.
How do you ever keep a schedule?
Right. So, we've talked about the Egyptians really being our Roman Empire. The men, they're all obsessed with the Romans, but the Romans and the Greeks didn't adopt this system until like 2,500 years later.
Because they're lame.
They're lame and they're like late to the game.
That's right.
And they were like, okay, I guess this makes sense what the Egyptians are doing. And the Egyptians are like, it's always made sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anywho.
Back to what you were saying.
But the Babylonians, they were the astronomers, and they were using the 60 partitions, and that's how they were using that for the astronomy, and that's how we get 60 minutes and in an hour and 60 seconds in a minute. Because they were using that for other sort of math stuff, something with like angles. And because of that, they were like, we should just use this for other things too, like time. And I'm like, in what world does that make sense?
Pick a better number, Egyptians.
Yes, especially, okay. So not to bring up Schoolhouse Rock again.
Always bring up Schoolhouse Rock.
Always. So I don't know if you remember Schoolhouse Rock, the math one.
There's not a lot about math that I remember, but go on.
Okay, well, I really struggled with math. So my dad was like, here is math Schoolhouse Rock. You need this.
Just sit down and rewatch this.
Yes.
And eventually you'll learn.
And so if you get to the end, it gets to 12. And the song is like, hey, little 12 toes.
Ew.
I know. Anyway, the whole thing, though, is like, if you were to think about it that way, 12s will be easier, because the reason 10s are so easy to us is because we have 10 fingers and we have 10 toes. So everything should go off of 10s.
Yes, it should.
And so if you're I get that 60 is like in a round number in the 10s, but it's also 6. And why would you use 6 and not 5?
That's a good question.
Because we don't have 12 toes. We're not little 12 toes.
No, we have 10 and half of 10 is 5. So that's just more easily divisible. But I honestly think, okay, here's the thing though, is like the Babylonians are really smart too.
Yeah.
Obviously they're like the astronomer people. It had to have something to do with like, this is exactly like the amount of time it's like taking these constellations, these deacons, to move across the sky.
Yeah, I think that's like why they use it, because of like the angles.
That makes sense.
So, like a circle, and then which is 360, which again is just not the number I think I would have chosen for that.
But like that's what it is.
I know. But I'm like, but we just made up what numbers were.
I know. We really did. We really did.
So again, like you said, would we have just been like, and this is 2?
I think so. We should do an episode on numbers. Because,
we will.
Like, not just math, even just numbers.
Yeah.
Like, where do numbers come from? And numbers are such a universal language.
Yeah.
Like, numbers are the same everywhere.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, it is.
Anyway.
Well, so here is like an amazing fun fact, is that in the 1790s in France,
the French and their decimal system.
Yes. And they're like going through the French Revolution.
Yes.
They're like murdering people in their government.
You know what would be nice? If everything was in tenths.
Yes. But it totally worked for everything but time.
I know. And it was like a while that they like tried to do this. So I think it was like, 1790, the French government tried to adopt decimal system.
Yeah.
So they wanted to have 10-hour days at 100 minutes and 100 seconds each. Yeah. That was all fine and dandy for everything else, for all of their, everything. Weight,
yes.
Libraries, volume, whatever.
Yeah.
But for time,
that lasted 16 months.
16 months, yes.
Which cracks me up, because first of all, Europeans are always like, oh, dumb Americans using this system that isn't the tens. And I'm like, you don't use it either for everything.
Look in the mirror.
First of all.
French.
You picked it for everything but time, you psychopath.
Honestly, though. And isn't it wild to think about? That was 1790. You're telling me that's the late 18th century. And they're like, what if we just undo everything we've done for the last 5,000 years?
Yeah. They're like,
sorry, did anyone consult with the Egyptians before they made this?
No.
Call? I don't. I mean, off with their heads, honestly.
Except I would have been one of those people who's like, yeah, let's do it.
Know.
Because I don't understand. Like, to this day, do you ever accidentally start using time math?
Oh my God, all the time.
Like,
I get so confused. I'm like, no, numbers stop at 60. It's like, no, that's not how that works.
Like, the thing that makes me the most mad is when I am working out and I'm like on my elliptical and
you're like, I'm 4.59 miles.
Yes. And I'm like, ooh, I am so close to being done with this workout. And then it's just like 0.6, 0.61. And I'm like, oh, I have to keep
the time and the distance and the numbers.
Yes.
Yeah, it's awful. That is truly awful.
So knowing all of this, that this is how we got this system, where do you think our system would be in an awful world?
That's a good question. So I hear what you're saying about having, 10 fingers, 10 toes. Mm-hmm. Everything in tens feels very natural to us. But I do question, and honestly, it would require me to do math, so I'm not going to do that. But I do question what that would look like. Like, would we be able to break it down? I mean, a 10-hour day seems wild to me. I don't know. Because really, when you think about it, the whole 12-hour things, it really works for the most part. Like, I mean, there's not 12 hours of, there's more than 12 hours of daylight, like in summer.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
I just don't think that we would have 24 hours and then use, because we're using 12s, we're using 24s, we're using 60. And I just don't think that would compute to us.
Yeah.
Ever, And like we have said, we're not using the astronomers.
No.
Because the sky always looks the same to us.
That is true.
So we're
just going to come up with whatever system.
Yeah. I just don't see us being like, oh my God, these exact same
Have you
12 constellations are in the sky. Let's use that.
It is so hard for me to imagine, like, okay, Indianapolis, when I look at the sky, I can't see shit. Like, sometimes I'm like, I don't know how, like, they looked at that and they were like, yes, this looks like a bear or whatever.
Right. Well, and then you see the constellations, like, for, what are they? The star signs,
there's a word for that.
Yes, astrology.
Yes,
like it. Libra and Cancer and whatever,
yada yada, so forth.
And but so it's like, I don't know, 12 dots, and then they've made like a whole human like doing something, and I'm like, I don't see that.
But really, though, I think the issue is light pollution.
I agree.
It makes it so hard. Like, obviously, the Babylonians had no source of light other than like fire. And that's not bright enough to really like cause much light pollution.
That's
looking
true.
at the sky. So I think it was a lot easier for them to see those things and notice those things. But still, like, I've seen pictures of places where there isn't a lot of light pollution and the stars look insane. I don't know how you would like pick anything out of any of that.
Right. But I just think that, like, they make these pictures, and even if you see where they've done like drawings of them and they're like, here are the stars,
right? But
then here's the picture. And I'm like, no, you're not connecting dots.
I've got the Big Dipper. That's it.
Yes, I can find the Big
Dipper. Which
is
not a whole constellation. It's a piece of another constellation.
Right. But then I'm also kind of like, how come I can always find the Big Dipper?
Because a spoon is something that I'm looking for more in the world than a bear or like a man in a belt.
That's true. But I'm like, when is it on the other side of the world? Is it ever?
Yes.
Then how come I can see it here? Am I just making it up?
I don't want to talk about it.
Am I just looking at the sky and being like, that's the Big Dipper?
No.
And it's like,
not.
That's not it.
You're not. Well, we have to do an astronomy episode.
Okay.
I took an astronomy class in college. Mistake. Huge mistake.
Same. It's a lot of math.
It is so much math. It's so much
hard.
science. It's a very, very difficult course. If you're currently in college, don't do that.
Don't do that.
I know that sounds fun. That's wrong.
It's not.
It is not fun. It's very hard. But I remember that we had to make these little, like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a paper, like when you play the game Twister?
Yes.
And there's the little
the spinner.
Yeah, the spinner thing. It's like that, but it's like 4 constellations and like the time of year and the time of day and, like what can be seen, blah, blah. So we had to make those. And there is no way I can conceptualize like exactly how that happens.
No.
I can't, my brain can't comprehend.
No. So, but because of that, I just don't see us having a 24-hour system.
I think I agree with that.
And being like 12 hours for the night and 12 hours for the day, even though that's actually not even true anyway.
And who has the audacity to be like, this is the system, okay?
Right?
I decided it's 24 hours and that's what we're doing.
I'm sure it was a man.
I'm sure it was a man too. Ugh. Anyway.
Anywho.
So, once they came up with that, then they started to develop some other things like sundials, which we already like kind of talked about sundials on the calendars episode. And obviously Hercules. Does anybody want to buy a sundial? Which we're going to bring up every time.
Yes.
And I think most people like know how sundials work, maybe.
But also I kind of don't. I get that it's a shadow thing.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically,
but that's my concept.
That's fine. I think that's fine.
Yeah, that's all I got.
I'm saying that that's fine because I have nothing further to offer you on the topic.
Good.
But they also have some other things that are like, I feel like everybody knows about sundials, whatever. But there were some other things that I was not familiar with. One of these was what was later called a water clock.
Yes.
So it was like water would drip into some sort of like reservoir and that would mark like the passing of time.
Yeah.
Like however, much water they would have like
ticks.
Exactly. Like on the inside of it so that they could see. Now in other places in the world, so in the eastern part of the world, like in Asia, I literally wrote on my notebook candles in Asia. And I was like, I hope I can remember exactly what I wanted to say about that. And I can, thank God. So apparently like in Asia, like particularly in China, I believe, they used candles to mark the passage of time. So however, whatever level the candle was at, how it burned was marking the passage of time.
Okay.
So some really like unique ways to like, what can we do to make sure? But like, obviously, water's not going to drip the same way always.
No.
Especially like I talked about I read about some problems with that is like the temperature, the weather, like, water, if it becomes colder, eventually it becomes more viscous until it's to the point of like being frozen. Right. Yeah. So it would potentially drip slower or faster depending on the time of year. So that's not super reliable.
True.
Same thing with candles. Like if there's wind, if there's like some other like, factor outside of just the candle burning that could manipulate it.
And I'm sure it depends on how like big the candle is, what type of fat was used for the candle, what the wick was made out of.
Exactly. But very interesting, stuff. Very creative ways to try to keep track of time.
And even with the sundial, if you live somewhere where it's not very sunny, like if you lived in the UK,
right?
How are you going to, if it's cloudy,
anyway?
Yeah, you're like, well, my sundial says it's not time at all.
Right. If you live in Forks, Washington, that's where Twilight's based. It just Twilight Zone. Then you're never going to know.
No.
It's, in case you've forgotten, it's always cloudy there.
I did know that.
Because vampires in that universe, they sparkle when the sun hits them instead of burning up like normal vampires. Less exciting, I think, the whole sparkly thing. But anyway.
I don't know. I love glitter.
I mean, I do too, but I'm like, own it, baby. Step out in that sun and glitter.
Oh, yeah. I would be like, look at me shine.
Haylie as a vampire is hysterical.
That would be very popular.
Hey, listener, if you're in the Indianapolis area looking for warm photos of you and your loved ones, you're going to want to check out Hey Blondie. Hey Blondie is committed to capturing people from all walks of life through all stages of life, from a new baby to graduation. Check out HeyBlondiePhoto.com for more information and give them a like on Facebook and Instagram at Hey Blondie Photo. I kind of have like a big jump in my notes, so we'll see if, where you're at. But then I have, we're kind of doing the whole sundial, water clocks, thing for a while until the earliest mechanical clock was in 1283, which is pretty impressive. and it was in Bedfordshire, England.
I did see that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's where the first one. And then I have some interesting things to say about that, but that kind of go on from that 1283 point. But like, do you have anything pre 1283? Anything else that you want to talk about?
I don't really have anything pre 1283 on that. So I guess my only thing is if it's pre 1283, in an awful world, how are we tracking time? We don't have mechanics of any type.
No.
Do you think that we would use the sundial? We had a listener ask us this question. Could we create the sundial?
No.
Remember
a few minutes ago when I was like, people know how sundials work. And then you were like, it's shadows. And I was like, and that's it. Let's move on. It's because that's all I know about them. It's shadows.
Yeah.
And from my understanding, it's like the length of the shadow. So like it involves some measurement and I'm not here for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know what system I like?
What?
Do you remember the movie? Oh gosh, do I remember the name of the movie? I just watched it and they're like, stars not aligned, not today. Road to El Dorado.
Oh my God, what a film.
Fantastic.
That and Prince of Egypt, fuck me.
So in that though, remember they're like playing that little like sports game with the ball and they got to like use their hip and get it through the hoop kind of a thing. But they're like, the game is over when the shadow touches the line.
Yes.
I feel like that would be our version of a,
you have 5 minutes left.
Yeah. That would be our version of a sundial because it's just like, here's my line. When the shadow hits it, it's a certain time, you know, instead of being like, here's a circle and a stick and like measure some angles.
Yes.
I just don't see us creating that.
No, I for sure don't see us creating that.
You know?
What exactly it would look like, I don't know. I mean, I think shadows are a good thing, but you sort of get back to that problem of you're relying so heavily on sunshine.
Yeah.
For that sort of thing. And then like my other thought is like, obviously we're observant enough that we're not as hip to the constellations as the Egyptians and the Babylonians, okay? But we are going to notice that the sun moves across the sky. That part I'm confident we will see. And so I don't know if we would be like, when the sun's about there, maybe. Like, I don't know.
Here's my issue with that. That plays a lot into like, I kind of feel like the cardinal directions, north, south, east and west.
The other ones.
And I think wherever I am facing is north. So I just don't think I'm going to get there. The Haylies of the world may not be able to use that system. The Libbys, I think, would.
The Libbys have good sense of direction. Like right now, I know that I'm facing south. It's because I know where I am and I know what I'm facing. And I know that that's south. What if I pulled my phone out and it was like, that's northeast, bitch?
See, and that's what happens to me.
No, but I actually do have pretty good sense of direction. Yeah. That's one thing I've got going for me. It's not a lot, but that is one thing. So I think that I would be able to figure it out. Like, this is interesting. Like, it comes up on that side and it goes down on that side. But I think I would be like left and right, which I know is still an issue for you.
The Haylies would still struggle with that because I do every day.
There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I think the Libbys would know how to do that. But again, that's really heavily relying on the sun. So like, I kind of dig the idea of like, I don't know. We have this, I kind of like the candles thing.
Yeah.
Like, I think candles. That's something that makes sense. I loved candles. First of all, I actually have an addiction.
Same.
It's unhealthy and
same. Except I like it.
Me
I could be doing worse things. I could be on drugs.
100%. There are way worse things than having candles.
All I do are buy candles on sale. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I want the house to smell nice and I like the ambiance.
We know that I don't buy them on sale. And okay, so this is how my brain works. I think Haylie knows this, but for anyone who's listening, this is how my brain works. My favorite scent is Bath & Body Works Leaves. That's my favorite candle.
Yes.
I love that candle. And every year I have a panic where I'm like, I don't have enough Leaves candles. So I buy like 3 more and then I never burn them because I'm like, well, what if I run out before next fall?
Yep.
And so over time, I've acquired like a backlog of like 9 or 10 leaves candles, and it's unhealthy. And my boyfriend does not like it. But it's like candle insecurity, where I'm just like, but what if I don't have that scent?
It's
and
your
I'll
Libby.
be so sad. It is. It is. I rely on it so much. So anyway, I like the candle thing.
Yeah, me too.
And like even now, like we say like this will burn up to like 16 hours or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's like obviously not if you're gonna like light it for 15 minutes. Don't do that, first of all. That's not nice to your candles. Yeah. Candles have memory.
Yes,
but anyway.
And then you get that stupid well and it never burns right.
And then you got to put the tin foil around. It's a whole thing. Don't do it. I'm just here to tell you that I think that's something that's like at least slightly more reliable than always relying on the sun.
I agree.
So I think that was a very good idea. Would we have come up with it? Maybe.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because we're going to need some sort of light source inside.
True.
Things like that.
And it's going to have to be fire.
Yeah. And I just kind of think that we would be able to make our candles fairly uniform.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because I think that we're just kind of very like precise people for certain things. And we would be like, I want them to look uniform. And I want them to, if we're using them for time, we'd have to make them uniform.
What if we had just like, here's how I'm envisioning this. Instead of like, Big Ben, big old clock right in the middle of town. What if we had like a hall of candles, and it was like the big candles would burn by the hour and the little candles would burn by the minute?
I love that.
Wouldn't that be so fun?
Yes.
And then everyone would just be like, well, we have to go to the hall of candles to figure out what time it is. Which is actually like, I know that sounds crazy, but like this is how people, like before having like large clocks like the one in Bedfordshire, England, this is, I mean, it was anybody's guess, just like, and even like after that. So like, okay, let's jump into it a little.
Okay.
1283, right?
Yep.
We're going post 1283 now.
Getting crazy with it.
So crazy. So there's obviously a lot of influence from the Roman Catholic Church.
Yes.
As there always is, because obviously.
We won't say more on
the
that.
Pope, yada, yada, blah, blah, whatever.
I have feelings. It's fine.
And so the reason there is such influence is because there were prayer times.
Yes.
Well, how do you know what time to pray together?
Got to ring your little bell.
Got to ring your bell. And so they started having it ring on the hour as like, this is a prayer time.
Yes.
And this is so fascinating to me, and I'm sure you know this already, but our listener doesn't, because they're not just sitting around reading about times and clocks and things like that.
But maybe they should, because it's
maybe
been fascinating.
They should. The bell became a very universal signal. Even now, you know, bells go off, that's a signaling of an hour.
Yep.
Remember when I lived across the street from a church with bells? That's a whole other thing. Rough. And then it started going off at like every hour on the hour, but like even 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, look, it's 2023. I'm going to need that to stop.
Yeah.
I can just tap my phone now and we'll get there. But anyway, so that became a very ubiquitous thing for keeping time for people, is hearing the bells and how many times it would ring. The Latin word for bell is clocca.
Yes.
That's where we get the word clock.
Uh-huh.
Because of the bell.
Isn't that fascinating?
Isn't that weird?
It is just wild.
Yeah.
And like, okay. So here's a little fun story that I learned in London. We went on a Jack the Ripper tour.
Love that,
and
first of all.
It was pretty cool, except there's really not that much information. So
what? You're telling me a centuries-old unsolved series of murder cases, there's not information
and
on
like
that?
Most of the buildings have been knocked down, so they're and they like don't actually know where these people like were living, so they're like they could have stayed.
Wouldn't it have been wild?
Yeah.
It's like, well, are you telling me they did or they didn't? Anyway,
so there's one of the reasons that this case was unsolved was because this was back before people had clocks, and so when they're like, oh, this person was murdered at 10 a.m. or like 9:45 in the morning, it's because of the clocks, the bells from the churches. They're like, it was around the time of this bell in the morning.
But that's like a whole like hour window.
Yes. And they're like, I think it was maybe 15 minutes before then, but no one had clocks. So it was all based on these bells. And that is how they were like trying to solve mysteries.
Which is insane because you think about now, like there's just so much stuff that's like, at this time I tapped my phone and are you psychotic like me? You've maybe never lived in like sketchy places like I have lived in a few sketchy places.
Yeah.
And like, even like, you know, recently I heard what I thought were gunshots, but like, it's so hard to tell these days.
Yes.
It's around, you know, if it's the month of July or August, good fucking luck because you're going to hear shit all the time.
100%.
But, so, you know, I'd hear something like that and I would literally like text my boyfriend and be like, it's this time and I just heard like 5 distinct pops.
Yeah.
Like just documenting this just in case. Never know.
Just in case.
Never know what the police are going to need or whatever.
Yeah.
But like, do you think about how like, I mean, how good we have cameras with timestamps on them. Like that has changed the course of investigating crime so largely. And I've never thought about that until you said that. I mean, an hour window is a big period of time.
It is. You can lose someone.
Yes.
And they are gone forever.
Gone.
If you don't catch them in that.
Slippery little snake.
I'm a snake.
Don't step on snake.
But yeah, so that's how they were using it. So I 100%, so I'm loving this candle idea. But I definitely think that we would come up with the bell system. I feel like someone would work at the hall of candles and they would ring the bell.
Yeah. There would be some sort of, you know what? You're so right. Because there would be some sort of way. It's like, you don't have to meet up at the Hall of Bell or the Hall of Candles. That's really obnoxious for you to have to come all the way into town. There has to be some way that we can signify.
And that's going to make you late.
Right.
Because you have to stop at the Hall of Bells, candles. Dang it.
Hear me out, Haylie. And this is something that's come to my brain via the Catholic Church.
Okay.
So we have something to thank them for. You know, when they're selecting a new pope, that...
No.
You have no idea where I'm going with this.
No.
Okay, you're going to love this, I think.
Okay.
I think it's a great idea. Okay, when they're selecting a new pope, they have to have all of the guys come together, and I can't think of what their names are right now, so don't ask me.
Are they the ones in the hats?
Yes.
Okay.
The ones in the hats, the red ones, right?
Cardinals?
Yes, because it's the color red. Anyway, that just occurred to me. Moving on from that. So when the cardinals all come together and they're discussing who's going to be the new pope, who is it, blah, 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 blah. So all the people are waiting outside. All of the, you know, Catholic fanatics of the Vatican are waiting outside. Who's going to be the new pope? Do they have consensus on who it is? When they have a consensus on who it's going to be, so they have this smoke tower and the smoke coming out is like white the whole day or whatever. When they make their decision, red smoke comes out.
Ooh.
I think it's red smoke that comes out at the top. So wouldn't it be kind of fun if every hour there was like an assigned color? And it's like, there's blue smoke coming out of the Hall of Candles. That must mean it's 3:00.
Yes.
Or whatever.
I like that.
That'd be kind of fun.
I would be fun. I like that.
Is a bell more reasonable? Probably.
I feel like we would also have to have some sort of noise. I don't know if we would immediately start with the bell. We might have just someone who's like, yoo-hoo.
Yoo-hoo, 2 p.m.
Yes, I feel like that's something we would do.
We do have to cater a little bit to the Haylies and the Libbys of the world that are maybe hard of hearing or have visual impairments, you know, so we have to kind of have both.
Plus, what's the day going to be like? Where in the world are they? You know, if it's cloudy and it's
maybe
foggy,
can't see the
you
smoke.
can't really see the smoke.
I get
so, you know, or if they live in a really dry area, maybe they shouldn't have all the smoke.
Yeah.
You know,
we have to be very mindful, very demure.
Very demure. Yes. So I think that would kind of be our system.
Yeah, I think so too.
You know, at least to start, because they had to have that kind of system to start too. And obviously, like you said, that was in the 1200s. And then I feel like not much happens for a while.
Yeah.
So really, like, once we get into clock making, that feels like a really new invention.
Oh, it for sure is.
You know?
It for sure is. And I don't think, and we'll get into it more next episode, specifically with like watches and timepieces. But I didn't really consider until I started reading about this just how novel watches are.
Yeah.
They really have not been around that long. And I think that is fascinating. But So we have our whole bell system
Yes.
in this regular, more bland world,
Yes.
as I like to call it. And then by the 1580s, we're getting really good at this. We're getting really good at the whole seconds, minutes thing. We've got it down pat. And then so like, I guess by the 1600s, we're really, or I'm sorry, the 1400s, we're gradually moving towards like people actually having clocks domestically, like in their homes. So yeah, I think that's kind of like really only the 1400s where it's like you may have a clock in your home, but they're still very expensive.
Yeah.
Very.
You got to be like rich to have that clock.
They're very like unique items to actually be able to have. Like it would be something that people would like, you have a clock? My God, you must be filthy rich.
Exactly. And nowadays we're like, oh, so many clocks. I have it on my watch. I have it on my phone, my microwave, my TV, everything's a clock nowadays,
exactly.
you know?
Yes, that's so true. Yeah. Everything is.
And then, of course, but then, you know, like there's a time change and you have to change all your clocks. Or the power goes out and you have to reset all your clocks.
The worst.
The worst.
The absolute worst.
Really quick, because I think we should talk more about like once getting into clocks in part 2. But speaking of the time change, would we come up with that?
Don't ask me about daylight savings. It's the same thing as a leap year, okay? Now, I didn't do any research about daylight savings.
I didn't either. This just came to me.
We all know that daylight savings wasn't invented until the 19th century. Why do we know that? Because of the great cult classic film, National Treasure. Thank you. Because Riley says, oh my God, I know something you guys don't know. Benjamin Franklin invented daylight saving time.
Yes.
And that wasn't until, I don't know, maybe the 1890s or something. Not that long ago. Well, fuck that guy, because I get pissed off every spring when I have to wake up a motherfucking hour earlier. Sorry, this makes me really nothing has made me more upset than daylight savings.
Daylight savings gets me real heated.
Fired up.
Here's the thing though, is like what I found out is daylight savings, I think we're technically on daylight savings right now.
Yes. Yep.
So it turns out I like daylight savings, but I want to
that Sunday.
But what I want is I want to be on daylight savings all the time.
Well, we used to be.
Yeah.
And then we had this little governor named Mitch Daniels, I think. Who Haley's like, don't look at me.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know.
Fucking know.
I just remember being a kid and being like, I like that. We don't do the time change. And then like throwing a tantrum when then we switched over to it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Mitch Daniels. And actually, this is so interesting
that guy.
that you bring this up. Because so I am a podcast listener. I know this is shocking information. And one of my favorite podcasts, Stuff You Should Know, shout out to Stuff You Should Know. I went to go see them live in Indianapolis about a week ago. And they were asking about, like, they did not know. They had just come from somewhere that was maybe on Central Time. And they came to Indianapolis and did not realize that we were on Eastern Time.
Oh.
And then someone, you know, they're just like kind of bantering with the audience and whatever. And one of the guys, Chuck, is like, well, is the whole state on Eastern Time? And we're like, no, because that makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, because my husband, his parents are divorced and they live like, I don't know, 20 minutes apart.
But
and
over a time zone.
Yes, so one is Eastern Time and one is Central Time. And we would make plans to see one and then go see the other. And it would be like 2:00. And then he would say, oh, well, we need to go see my dad at 2:00. And I was like, what?
Well, that's right now.
And I can't like get my mind wrapped around that fast enough to go back and forth. And so it's just confusing. And then they used to not be on
Central
Time, or maybe it was like maybe
the whole state was on Central Time at one point because they wanted us to be in line with Chicago.
I think it was that like they were on Central Time, but they didn't do daylight savings, and we did.
Yes.
And so then that was confusing because then half the year we were together and half the time we weren't. And I'm like, that's...
and even an hour
so
just messes you up.
Yes, it's so confusing. So I think maybe we would have just had our system start at this, time.
Yes, I don't think it's ever going to change.
Then, go through daylight savings. That's trash.
No, daylight savings is 100% trash.
Yeah.
But talking about time zones, actually, because, you know, we'll approach the clocks, watches situation next episode with our very special guest. But I thought this was kind of interesting about time zones. So before railroads became a thing, in the United States, we very much went off local time. And when I say local time, I mean local. Okay. So like the example that I saw was noon occurs in Boston 3 minutes before it occurs in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is not that far from Boston. Okay. So there was a 3-minute difference on the Boston clock versus the Worcester clock. And by the time that railroads, because they're purely doing it off of the sky, right? Like it's still 60 minutes, 60 seconds, 12 hours, 24 hours, whatever.
Right.
But they're still going off of, okay, sunrise is at this time, noon's at this time, whatever. By the time that we develop railroads, we're like, we can't be doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Because just 10 miles away in Worcester, noon isn't for another 3 minutes. So this is really a problem. And then I was thinking about legally how much of a problem this would be.
Yeah.
Like that is totally what came to mind for me. I was like, oh my God, that would be a nightmare. Like trying to figure out. And then I was thinking about like, there's a case that we had to read in law school that I don't remember the name of now, so don't ask me. But it was something like these ships were like named the same thing. And the contracts got all like fucked up.
Oh,
remember that? Because it was like, well,
like,
it's this one that's arriving at this port at this day and time. And then it was like, there was a separate one. It was a whole thing.
Yeah.
It was a whole thing. And then you're kind of like, okay, so I get why with like the railroads, they had to make it much more uniform.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until 1883 that we actually developed time zones.
Wow.
That is, I mean, 240 years ago.
That's not long ago. And I'm kind of like, do you think in a world full of Haylies and Libbys that we would figure that out? Or, I mean, I think we would figure it out eventually, but do you think it would take us that long? Do you think it would take us longer?
So I just realized I said 240 and I meant to say 140 and I just wanted to correct that.
Okay.
Because it made me feel stupid. And I was like, wait a minute,
I didn't catch it at all because I'm not good at math.
Somebody would catch it. And somebody would write into the podcast. No, I'm kidding. Do I think that we would come up with it before then? Honestly, yes, I do think we would come up with it before then because I think we'd be like, we talked about the candles. We're wanting them to be very uniform in size. We recognized how important this is.
I agree.
And I think that, with our letter writing campaign to talk about the eclipses.
That's right.
We're talking to the Haylies and Libbys on the other side of the world.
Exactly.
And we have to be able to uniformly say, like, we get it. We don't want it to be, noon for you it's the stars are in the sky. It's total night. Like, we're going to have to come up with a zone of like where things are going to change. So I think we'd come up with something. Not sure it would be as sophisticated as the whole time zone situation that we have now.
I don't think so either, because that also comes back into play with astronomers.
Yes.
And clocks.
I know.
So I think this is a good stopping point.
Yes. Okay.
Before we get to part 2.
So exciting. We've left you on the edge of your seats. We have more to say.
I'm sure they're like, please stop.
Please shut up. Okay. So join us next week for Timekeeping Part 2.
Yes.
Fully Ado. With a very, very special guest that we're not going to tell you who it is.
Yes, I think it'll be so exciting.
You're going to love it, though, I guarantee. So tune in next time. In the meantime, if you're behind, shame on you. No, I'm kidding.
Catch up.
But please catch up on the podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts.
And YouTube.
And we'll see you then.